In this video we'll talk about a group of relatively small structures that are about 150 meters wide, and they occur in a very close cluster. So basically we've focused in on one here. We'll use the ruler device. I'll show it's about 150, actually 160 meters wide. Again, it consists of what appears as a very deep tunnel or crater surrounded on one side by larger rod structures that are luminous, that appear to actually emit energy rather than just reflect sunlight. It's about 70 meters high or long. These could be actually horizontal rods forming a building on one side of the crater. There's actually one internal and very thin ones on the outer side. And you'll see around the edge you've got the excavations happening, and quite a few close by, but these are actually quite luminous. So if we come in at a height of about 1.8 kilometers, these can be seen, three that are occurring pretty clearly. We'll zoom in on this one here. So again, they look about the same size. They're about 150, 170 meters. We'll do a quick measurement on this one. Oh, sorry, it's about 190, that one. So they're quite large. Now this one here, we'll just use a daylight configuration on this one. We'll just go back to the edge. What we have is internal rods there as well, which actually change with the angle of the sunlight, so that can be seen that change. So actually we can then work out this is a deep type of a tunnel or excavation. But what we have is a clear white line excavation around that one, clear straight line. We'll see the actual bright rod structures there that are very luminous, extremely luminous, and they actually coalesce, and a very fine ring around the outside or the opposite side of the crater. So this is a common feature of all these structures that we actually see on the moon and a few on Mars. So by just looking around, we'll see similar structures. Actually, these have a little shadow. These are upright rods that have a shadow that occurs. We'll just check this again with the daylight saving. Daylight a time mechanism or a shadow mechanism. As we zoom out, we see that very fine zigzag line around it, and that happens there as well. And again, even on this one. So if we just zoom in a fraction, we'll see it there as well. There's one internal one there, and the ones around it. This is the one we've seen before. This is the one on top. So by just looking in a common area where we see one structure, generally you see others of a similar shape. There's that ring around it and internal structures. This was seen in about 3 or 4 very large craters as well on Mars. They have that very similar deep tunnel, a very large rod-like building on one side, the zigzag fine pattern on the other one, on the opposite side, and usually 1 or 2 internal rods. Now again, these could be entrances to cavities which are located beneath the surface. We can't test that theory anyway. Here we go. Just by zooming in on one other close one, we see some very definite configurations happening. See smaller structures there. We see zigzag patterns occurring, courtyards around the other side, straight line patterns. This is interesting because you've got the zigzag pattern happening on this side. You've got 3 internal ones. There's a group that coalesce very brightly, so these are very luminous and appear to emit energy. And what we have here is a T-bone type of rod horizontally on the ground below it. I mean, to the south of it. And we'll just do a quick measurement of that one. It's about 160 meters. So on Earth it would be quite large. It would be the size of a large building. And that's what all these other ones appear to be as well. This is a bit smaller as we zoom in on this one. The resolution is not that good close up on that one. There's an interesting small one there which has a definite square pattern happening around it. So we'll just follow that rule. We haven't found any previously, so we'll just follow the rule. If we go in the same area, you'll generally see similar structures happening. And that rule obviously applies here, except on Mars. We just saw 2 or 3 very large ones on Mars. Some were 4.5 kilometers, others were 2.5, where these white luminous rod buildings are on one side, the zigzag pattern on the other side of a tunnel or crater, and they had a few internal ones there as well. So these are a lot smaller. These are about 100 meters. So by Earth standards, they're not small, but obviously here at high altitude, here we have a very good one. We have a very good pattern happening here. Extremely good pattern. Just let me label that now. What we have here is a very nice pattern happening. We've got 2 or 3 elevated vertical rods, which I'll just do one measurement, that are very luminous. It's about 70 meters. That's the average of the ones around here. But what we have here is a very nice pattern happening on the opposite side, which you can see the definite right angles, and here the zigzag pattern. So I'm not sure what those things are, but from a little bit higher distance we can actually see it better. So that's very interesting actually. So this was found by just going around the surrounding areas, seeing structures that are similar, and then generally the rule is if you zoom in they will look similar and have buildings on one side, on the other side a very fine lattice, and this shows quite a bit of greenery happening in the soil. It's quite green here, very lush. Excavation around this one where it's a darker green around it. And again, we only saw a few of these on Mars, and they're very large. They're about 4.5 kilometers. Some are 2.5, and they just have like endless deep pits or tunnels, which are unusual on Mars because most of them are actually flat, and they don't have what happens here on the Moon, which is these seemingly endless crater formations, which seem like craters, but some are actually perfectly round, and there wouldn't be an explanation to why they'll be so deep. Here we have a very interesting building happening here. Very luminous and very multi-faceted. Rather than having longer rod-like structures, it's a group of smaller ones. So I'll just do a quick measurement on that one there. Okay, that's 280, so that's a fairly large one. And we'll see that right angles and squares happening around there. The tubes actually produce right angles, and the rod structures, there's quite a few internal ones there, and that's very luminous. Actually, I'll label this one as very, very bright. Yeah, this is a very bright one. So again, the whole anatomy of the structures are tubular, white tubular structures composing these so-called buildings on the surface, usually near a very deep excavation or a tunnel, and the opposite side usually has a very fine lattice of these tubes that look bright. There's an example there of quite a few happening. Some are vertical and some are horizontal. So we're at a height of 12 kilometers. So from 12 kilometers it just looks like a normal surface of the Moon, but again, as we zoom in closer, we'll just see there's something that strikes my eye there that doesn't look normal. Let's go in. Okay, interesting. I thought that angle on there was actually a shadow, but this is what appears to be a deep excavation there. This is interesting too. We've got very pronounced right angular type of differences in colours on the ground. We've got 1, 2, 3 rods there, rod towers, and what looks like on that side as a shadow of that one there, just rather than excavation. I think that one's a shadow. I'll just do a quick comparison of the height of that one. It's about 60 meters, and that one there is composed of a group, but I haven't seen it formed in this way before. It's usually a very square excavation right there. Might label this too. So the feature that's interesting here is obviously that zigzag pattern, a very grey area around it. It seems a uniform consistency. Then 2 or 3 towers, and you see just the excavations around that area there. So that's why this sort of stood out, because it didn't seem atypical for that area. We'll just zoom in on here, so something that doesn't look typical, and we were correct. What we see here is again the group of white towers on one side, and these actually appear to be facing the other way, or the edges of them, or actually internal ones. I'm not sure. If we do a quick comparison of the measurements, about 200 meters, so it's not small, but this one has a very nice pattern where you see the zigzag consistency on the opposite side, the towers on one other side, and a very dark area there, which either could be a shadow or a crater. Now on quite a few of these, they're too large to be just shadows and too dark, so that's why I'm not sure about that one there. But that becomes an interesting one there because of these 4 together. It seems as though those ones are going sideways and they're the edge of those ones. But obviously from this height it's very hard to work out what's happening. But obviously things are happening. That's the main thing. We do have things happening on the ground. That's a very bright group of rods together on here, very luminous. And again, this was seen on Mars as well. On one side, very bright and luminous. Then a large cavity, followed by that zigzag pattern. I think that could be all for this video. So we just, as I said, we just focused on one group, and we travel through the landscape just to pick up any patterns that stick out, because that's usually a best way to find these structures. Here we go, we just found one there that looks good. You've got one internal, there's a zigzag pattern on one side and very bright luminous ones on this side.